This week we got more parts put on the Harley, so we should be ready to fire this thing off for you next week. Jonah's been busy working on the Kawasaki Concourse, and he's making some pretty impressive changes to it to make it look more like a standard. And we also got the vines cut away from that trailer and pulled one of the motorcycles out of it, so you're not going to want to miss that. Thanks for tuning in. There's a concave at the bottom of each of the saddlebags that sits on this bar, and there should be a rubber cushion that goes between the two. The one on this side was missing from the bag, so what I've done is I've taken a piece of heater hose and I've cut it to length and split it. So what I'm going to do is wrap this bar here, and the bag will sit right on it. That'll keep it from any kind of vibrations or cracking, so we don't have metal against the fiberglass. So again, I'd like to split this open. I'll put it right around the metal bar, like that. And in some cases we can use weather strip adhesive to glue it down or even zip tie it. But this thing fits so snug, and once the weight of the bag is on it, it's bolted down, it's going to hold it just fine. Now I'm ready to set the bag on, get the hardware on it, and this side will be done. As I said before, I've got plans for the trunk lid. The first thing is to get some fiberglass laid into the recessed area. Got extra big pieces of fiberglass to put on this. I'm going to lay the first piece on. Alejandro's going to finish it off. So the first thing we're going to do is saturate this piece of glass. And once one side is done, I'll flip it. Get the other side done. So you can see the white there, that's where it's still dry, or it doesn't have any of the resin on it yet. So we'll get that desaturated, and we'll get it laid up on there. I'll pick it up like so. Lay it right into that recessed area. And we'll take our brush, flatten it out, get out all the air, make sure it gets up into those corners. Next thing I'm going to do is I've got this short strip piece here that I'm going to put in up here because it's thicker here, or needs to be thicker there. So I'm going to put that short strip in, then follow it up with another large one. And that should be enough. We'll let that cure, grind it down, and we should be able to finish it off with filler. As long as it's not too much of the recessed area left, but I don't think it will be. I think this will work just fine. Alright, so this piece is going to lay in there like that. Now Alejandro is going to come up and put this next big piece in once he gets it saturated. And then the other, a couple other small pieces that we have to do as well. Getting the rest of the glass strands saturated, and I'm transferring it over to the trunk lid. We could have just filled this with body filler, but because of the vibration, it would have cracked very easily. So we're going to build it up and strengthen it up with the glass, and then we'll put a skim coat of filler on top of that. Once he's done with that, he's going to take this strip here and put it down to the lower side for where it rolls over and it's recessed there. get the air out of that, and then he's going to do the 4 holes where the original trunk rack would have been mounted. We're going to get rid of all that and make it a nice smooth top.
I'm soldering the taillight wires for the Harley. My first step is to tin the wires.
With the taillight done, Alejandro is working on the turn signals now. So he's getting both of those wires tinned, and he'll melt them together, then put on the heat shrink. The fiberglass is hardened on the Harley trunk lid, but it looks like it's going to need a little bit more to strengthen up before we put on the filler. So we're going to grind that down and lay on a little bit more glass.
After bleeding the front brakes, I noticed that they were dragging a little bit, so I decided to take them apart and clean them. As you've seen us do before, the first step is to blow out the pistons.
You can see the one piston is already out, so it's taking the path of least resistance for that piston to come out. So now we're going to have to get the second one out, but we'll show you how we're going to do that.
So we don't damage the piston, we use pieces of fuel line over the jaws of the pliers to protect it while we take it out.
You see the small bore of the caliper is pretty corroded and dirty in there. That's the way the other caliper was. So we'll get these cleaned up, get the pistons polished off, and put this back into service.
I'm lubricating the seals with brake fluid before putting them in. With the seals in place and pistons cleaned, we're ready for final assembly. After reinstalling calipers and bleeding them, they are both functioning as they should. Since the fairing is not going back on, I'm taking apart the gauge cluster to find alternative ways to mount it. I have a really cool idea of how I'm going to mount the gauges to the concourse. It's definitely going to be a one-off, so stay tuned. Since I'm not using the OEM gauge cluster, I've labeled all the wires on the wiring harness to transfer to the new cluster that I'm building. Since we're not using the lower fairing, I'm relocating the coolant reservoir bottle. This is where I'm going to be mounting the new coolant reservoir bottle.
We're ready to open up the crypt and get one of those motorcycles pulled out that we're going to work on next. You can see the vines have been growing for quite some time. Have the whole back door locked down. We're going to get all that cut away so we can get it opened up. I'm here with my son Michael getting ready to open up this trailer. We got to get all these vines and stuff cut out of the way. Then we're going to pull that one bike out of there that Mike Pig has been after for a really long time, but you're going to have a battle with Michael to get a hold of that one once we're done. We had to resort to using the Sawzall to cut through the rest of it because it had flattened so much and tightened itself between the bar and the door that we weren't able to open it. So With this last piece cut out, we should be able to open it up. With all the vines cut loose, we're ready to open the door. You can't see what else is in here. Here it is, the 1978 Kawasaki KZ1000 Z1R. This bike was made for 2 years in 78 and 79, and a handful of them were sent to a company, ATP, to have turbos installed on them. They were sent back to Kawasaki and sold at the dealerships with no liability and no warranties. Those bikes then were putting in about 6 to 8 pounds of boost, 140 to 145 horsepower, which for the day was pretty fast. This bike's outfitted a little better than that. The bottom end has been welded, it's got blower pistons in it, mainly valve train, and the turbo and intake have been updated to a Ray J, which is capable of now producing about 225 horsepower, which even up and through the 90s was more power than a Ford Mustang. There are several manufacturers out there today producing motorcycles with more horsepower and mile an hour than this bike was capable of, but not for its day. Then again, those bikes are running on chassis and suspensions that are designed to take that kind of power. This one is not. Many years ago, an engineer friend of mine did the math on this bike between the final drive and fifth gear and the circumference of the tire. This bike will do a true 195 miles an hour. And here's what I can tell you from my own personal experience. There's 160 miles an hour on the speedometer. It's been buried many times. It will power wheelie at 70 miles an hour, and it's been airborne once. I wouldn't recommend any of it. I have a motorcycle magazine at home where an article was written by one of the staff writers after riding one of the original Z1 turbos, which was not nearly as fast as this one. And he finished the article by saying this bike was best suited to be chained in a corner and fed raw meat. What's in store for this bike? I'm not 100% sure, but what I can tell you is we're going to put this thing back out on the road because that's where it belongs. So I hope you continue following along week to week to see what the progress is on this bike once the Harley's done. Next time on Bulldog Builds, the Auto 3s and 4s will be back in the lab working on projects that you loyal followers haven't seen them work on since last March. They're going to get busy on this 48 again, they're going to finish up that truck behind me, and we've got a Honda Civic that needs an engine put in it, and they'll be working on that as well. I'm very excited to have those guys back in the building on Monday, but what I'm more excited about is that the show can finally go back to what it was originally intended for, and that's to show you how talented some of these young people are. See you next week.